Dear students of Reddit, who's the worst teacher you've ever had? Substitute teacher for my astronomy class. She was old-fashioned, and her punishments were a little outdated. I came late to class because I was doing a yearbook assignment and had a slip from my teacher that explained why I was late. We had just done a quiz and they were done, but she hadn't collected it. She accused me of cheating and then made me sit outside the classroom to do the test. She then went back inside and gave out a new assignment. She said everyone in that classroom was being awful and made them stay for lunch. She sent me to the principal's office and my class walked out on her. I had a really sweet guy and a few of my friends come in to defend me. It doesn't really seem that bad looking back on it now, but at the time she was not pleasant. Not currently a student, but when I had a first grade teacher who, whenever she caught me chatting with another student, when I was supposed to be listening, would yank on my ear. On the flip side, in 10th grade I was in the hospital for a few weeks. Once I returned to school, my language arts teacher stayed after school every day to help me catch up until I was back on track with the other students in the class. Neutron physics professor. When we asked what the best way to study for the test was, he said to take the test, since we would all end up failing the first time anyways. And he averaged the tests, so we could theoretically never get an A unless we guessed right and studied exactly what he would test on. BTW, this is for grad school, which means that anything lower than a B can get you kicked out. My current professor in my nursing program. My cohort is made up of 74 students and we all have her for the same class. Not one person has anything positive to say about this woman. During lecture she only reads the PowerPoint slides as they are without elaborating or teaching about the subjects of the slides. She then tries to relate what the topic of the slides are to her clinical experience in the hospital. But her stories are convoluted, distracting from the actual topic, and very off tangent. She basically talks about herself as God's gift to anyone who has had her as a nurse. She is by far the biggest narcissist I have ever encountered. I have never met anyone who has thought so highly of themselves before. When it comes time for her exams, many students do very poorly because the material on the exams are often not covered in her lecture. There is almost zero relation of what she says in class and the questions she asks on the exam. Reading the chapters multiple times has proven to be an ineffective method in preparation for her exams. When students go to her office hours for help, she never gives any rationale to any answers on exams or slide questions. She says to read the book. Many of us question her knowledge of the subject she is teaching. It becomes suspect when not even a theory can be given. I understand the concept of students learning on their own, but she can't even point the one seeking help in the right direction. On a side note, she claims she can smell a patient bleeding internally. I had a nursing teacher kind of like that, except she would deliberately fail me during fundamental practice. Only when working on the dummies. I would do everything exactly right, but she would tell me that I would need to redo it after everyone else has had their turn. So I'd always end up waiting until well past the class time to redo my practice in front of her. If I did it with another teacher, I would pass with flying colors. That teacher never could tell me what I was actually doing wrong. It was always figure it out. My second grade teacher. I always had terrible penmanship, but we had to write a report on a book about an animal. I picked penguins. The next day she called me up in front of the class. She said my report was so bad and illegible that she was going to have to tell the principal and that I was going to be expelled from second grade. I bawled my eyes out because I thought I was going to never be allowed to go to school again and knew I'd get my ass whooped when I got home. She told a second grader that he was going to get kicked out of school because of penmanship. She was just a terrible human. Fluid dynamics professor. On an exam he had a true/false section. +1 for correct, -2 for wrong or empty. Question whatever. An inviscid fluid means it has zero viscosity. About 2/3 of the class marked true. He marked it wrong for everyone because you only assume a fluid is inviscid. I sent him scans from the textbook, the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, and the Oxford dictionary definition. He would not budge for anyone. Some of my aero friends laughed at the dude. 4th grade. My glasses broke, but not too big of a deal, because I sat in the front row. She moved me to the back of the class. She would write assignments on the board and wouldn't read it off. Told the girl next to me she was not allowed to tell me what it said and told me my parents needed to get my glasses fixed. I couldn't make my parents do that. It was rough. Hey Mrs. Johnson, F you. It's been 24 years and this still upsets me. For context, I went to Catholic school in the 90s. In 7th grade, there was this kid named Patrick that was a little slower than the rest of us. The teacher hated Patrick, mildly bullied him whenever possible. I don't remember what the trigger was, but one day the teacher just lost his shit and sort of half choked, slammed Patrick up against the chalkboard, lifting him completely off the ground. I bit of a tangent. That prick loved What a Wonderful World. Played it constantly. Creepy in hindsight. Gym teacher in high school. Roided up and dumb as a rock. Refused to sign off on doctor's notes students would bring in to be excused from gym class, which was interesting when he did it to a girl on crutches. To this day one of the biggest a-holes I've ever encountered. Or the math professor I had in college who was a brilliant guy and had degrees and awards coming out his ass, but he was a god-awful teacher and had less than zero people skills. That class was absolutely brutal. Health and safety teacher, late 50s early 60s maybe. He was very much like Ozzy Osbourne. Stutter, forget unforgettable things, begin to vacantly stare into space sometimes halfway through conversation. Worst of all was the contradiction. Oh lord. He would say, write this down. This is the best answer explanation for this question. Then skip 20 minutes forward to when he was marking the questions and a meltdown would ensue because we wrote the wrong answer and he didn't know where we possibly could have got it from. A math teacher that also worked with the cheerleaders. The teacher gave extremely preferential treatment to the cheerleaders. They got out of class anytime for any reason. No homework on their menses, we all knew, because they would tell the teacher directly while in class, but the other girls in class would complain about not receiving the same treatment. The teacher was highly disorganized and rarely actually taught anything. It was mostly do this page in class, do this page for homework. She would gather the cheerleaders at her desk during class for little powwows on hemp lotion. MLM in school, I kid you not. Went in one day after struggling on problems and said, look, I figured it out. Her response? Well, let me give you a cookie. Got sent to detention for telling her to F herself. She also called me out twice in class for being a pagan. She really liked to harp on that. Later on she was fired for having sex in her classroom, not with a student though. Vindication at last. I hope she never works with school-age children again. High school in the mid-80s. I took the school's first ever computer class, taught by the gym teacher. She read straight from the book. If the book was wrong, and it was wrong a lot, then she was wrong, and we had to answer wrong on the test or fail. In high school the top 3 shitty teachers were Mr. T, whose freshman daughter walked in on him banging his senior TA. Second was Mr. B, who would chug vodka from a chemistry flask, stagger out of the supply closet, put on a nature film, and pass out on the back counter, and snore louder than the movie. When the bell rang, we just got up, and went to our next class with him still snoring away. Lastly, Mr. R, who would go out to his car between classes to get baked, then come back in, and spend the entire class hitting on senior girls. Mr. T was fired on the spot, and was replaced by a substitute. The other 2 were fired a few years later I heard. There were other shitty teachers, both male and female, there who were also rumored to be banging students, that quietly got jobs elsewhere right after Mr. T got busted. My 2nd and 5th grade teacher, Mrs. B. She was absolutely awful. In 2nd grade I had picked a 5th grade level book from the library, The Old Willis Place by Mary Downinghan, in case anyone's wondering, and she took me outside the classroom, sat me down, and told me to my face that I was not smart enough to understand this book, and that I would absolutely fail if I tried taking a reading test on it. And she didn't say this with any empathy. It was completely cold-blooded, especially for a 7-year-old. Later I scored a 100% on the reading comprehension test, and she tried to convince the vice principal that I cheated, and berated me in front of the class because of this. Thankfully, the VP believed me, and I'm still proud of that 100. She also shouted at me when I wasn't smiling for no reason, and I started crying. She moved up to 5th grade the year I entered 5th grade, and I got stuck with her as my homeroom teacher. She would give me demerits for the smallest things, and even threatened to give me detention for reading a book from the public library during reading time, because it wasn't authorized by the school. Yeah, whatever lady. She would target me over other students, and berate me in front of the class. She also refused to let me go to the nurse's office to get ibuprofen and a menstrual pad, and I almost bled all over my skirt because of it. We also met with the school counselor about this, and she spent the whole meeting accusing me of being a troublemaking brat who didn't listen to orders, which is entirely untrue if you read any report card of mine from elementary school. That's it for today. Hope you guys liked it. Do all the YouTube stuff and I'll see you all tomorrow.